Welcome to the Local Marketing Beat, brought to you by Uberall. I am Christian Ariola, and I'm going to be your host for today. The Local Marketing Beat is all about helping location marketers stay in the know on the hottest digital trends across the web. We're going to surface the need-to-know updates related to local digital marketing and ask the experts what they know, why it matters, and what it means for location marketers. So what's the beat on Local Marketing Street this month? Let's get to it because we are talking about a very hot topic right now, and that is Google Analytics 4 with the upcoming changes. I mean, it's the word on the street, not just me, right? Like everybody else is concerned and talking about this. And for that, we have a very special guest today. It's going to cover all things Google Analytics, and we're just lucky to have you here, Brie. Welcome to the show.
I am super excited to be here and talk about everybody's favorite topic right now, Google Analytics 4.
Right. I mean, we're lucky to have you here. Bree is the owner of Beast Analytics, and she's really going to help us crack the code and get ready for GA4, right? So with that in mind, before we jump into GA4 and all the fun stuff that you're going to share today, I really want to ask you something, Bree. What was the last local business search you did and why? Like, tell us the story. What were you searching for?
Yeah, so I'm actually about to go visit my parents. They just moved to Illinois, and the last search I did that was a local search was for drive-in movie theaters in Illinois because I love going to movies. I love being outside, and so it's a good mix of the two. And it turns out they do have a drive-in there, so hopefully we're going to go see Fast and Furious 10 while I'm there.
That's awesome. I've always wanted to go to one of those, and just for whatever reason, I've never had the luck. But let us know how it goes. I'm sure you'll have a blast out there.
Yes, I love the drive-in.
So, I mean, for everybody listening, and Bree, I mean, if you've logged into Google Analytics in the last several weeks, you've probably seen that, quote unquote, that timer that's showing up on your screen. And it's basically just reminding us, right? That Universal Analytics is coming to an end. You got to migrate to Google Analytics 4. And to help us really navigate through this, I have a few questions for you, both from our customers or for marketing team or even myself. I'm bringing up some questions that I want to pick your brain about. So first, let's start by covering a little bit of why is Google making this change? I mean, Universal Analytics has been around forever, and I feel pretty good about it. I learned it my way. Now I got to learn Google Analytics 4, and so most of our listeners. So why now?
Yeah, so Universal Analytics has been around for 10 years now. It came out in 2012, I believe, so almost 11 years, I guess. And Universal Analytics was built at a time where, user journeys were a little bit different. The amount of data and how data was collected was a little bit different. And now we're in an age where a lot of those things I mean, people can browse the internet with their refrigerator. Like it's weird, right? Things have gotten a lot different. So some of that is what we have to take into consideration, right? Just the user journey, how people are using the internet, the things that we have to collect. But also the biggest reason, and the reason that it came so abruptly and that it's happening right this minute, is legislation. So we saw GDPR roll out, and consequently, Universal Analytics became illegal in some countries because of how data is collected, what data is collected, where it's stored, how it's retained, right? All of this information that Google had access to, and that we had access to as marketers, actually didn't fall within the legislation. And it's not just GDPR now. Now we have like CCPA, which is California's version, and the legislation is expanding throughout the states. Virginia has things in drafts. There are a lot of states that have things in drafts, and almost 70% of countries at this point have some form of data legislation. So the reality of it was, if Google wanted people to keep using their analytics products, they had to scrap what they had, get rid of that data, and start again. And that's what we're seeing right now. That's why there is a doomsday clock and everybody's being forced to use GA4.
So Bree, I mean, people are migrating to this app, to the new platform, as a new UI, new reports. I mean, almost everything, it feels new. What is different in GA4, and what should users know when they're starting out and they're making this transition?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for users to note is that, okay, so we're starting from zero, right? When you create a GA4 property, there's nothing in it, it's zeros. Again, that has to do with the legislation. We can't keep that data. Another thing is when they decided to move over to GA4 and they knew they had to make the new platform and the data that they were collecting was going to be different, it's a completely different data structure. So everything is event-based in Google Analytics 4. So you're going to see events like session start and first visit and things of that nature. So it looks a little different, but the reality of it is all the same dimensions and metrics are there. It's just how they look and where they're at in the platform. But because this data structure is different, you are going to see variations in the numbers. So if you're trying to compare Universal to GA4, just know that that data is not going to look one-to-one because the data structure, which is essentially just the back end, is completely different.
And from the projects and clients that you work with, what do you think are the most important things to consider as you're talking about the difference in data structure being one? What else is people need to be aware of when they're either setting up or configuring GA4, right? They're making the transition. What would you tell them if you had to do the couple of tips?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing, the easiest way to put it is the foundation has to be right. In GA4, there are a lot of things that are kind of hidden that people are used to being able to touch or don't feel like they need to touch. Both of those things are equally important in GA4. So the biggest thing is when you go and you set up your property, or even after you set up your property, I am still encouraging people to go do this, even if they set it up back in 2020 when it rolled out, because a lot of these things are easy to miss. But what I'm telling people is when you're in that the admin section, right, where you set up your property and whatever, there's two columns. There's your account column and your property column. I'm encouraging everyone to go through and touch every single one of those options in the property column and expand out all of the options, all of that stuff, because there are a lot of things that are kind of hidden throughout. Like, for instance, if you wanted your demographic data, you have to go in to that property section, go into data collection, under data collection, go into I think it's just called data collection. Under that as well, there's a few different things. And you have the option for Google Signals, which is how you're getting demographic data like age, gender, interest. But you have to go in and physically turn that on because it's a GDPR concern, and also it can lead to some thresholding, so that's something you have to be aware of. But like if you wanted that, you'd have to go in there. Another thing is filtering by IP address, right? The only way you're going to find that is if you go into the data stream, go into configure tag settings, go into seal, and then you're going to see that filter out by IP address. So really, it's just taking the time to be diligent and click on all the options and see what they all are and applying them as your business needs them to be applied.
I guess that covers me. I feel guilty right now as you're talking because I always filter out IPs, right? You want to filter out your headquarters or even your home if you're visiting the website multiple times, and I couldn't find it, right? And I know I did not expand every option, so that's but
yeah,
and
they've
you
done
were
a good job
mentioning
of hiding things. They've done a good job of hiding things for sure.
and that was my feeling, right? Back in the day when I signed up, it just felt like I actually had to do research to find things that I was so used to know where they were.
Yeah.
So you were touching base a little bit on the historical data piece, right? Why we're starting from scratch, why this is brand new. Is there any way or any recommendations to keep some of the historical data?
Yeah, so you can actually go through and like export the reports that you want to see. You can from Universal Analytics, I should say, all that data. In theory, you could export them into CSVs and have them that way, or export them into like a Google sheet and have them that way. Some people are going in and doing big data dumps into BigQuery. And the reason they're doing that is because GA4 has a native integration to BigQuery as well. So if you use something like a Supermetrics or Power My Analytics or something of that nature. You can connect to Universal Analytics, do a dump into BigQuery. It's a one-time thing. And then GA4 will do daily dumps through a native integration with BigQuery. Again, that's something that you see in that properties panel. So it's kind of, one of those two things. There's a more manual process where it's like, really, the only things that we're going to try and look at historically are, what pages were people visiting, where were they coming from, and where did the people that convert come from, right? Then you could just export all those into like a Google sheet, and then you can, refer back to them using like a Looker Studio or something like that, which honestly, that works for most people, because the reality of it is, I hate to say this, but most people aren't using a ton of different data from Universal Analytics. They're looking at one or two views that they rely on. So I guess you just pick whichever one applies to your business.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I feel like it's just one of those things that, because it's not there, it's a little bit more scary than knowing it's there and you don't
Exactly.
even check for it. That makes sense. Now, when you logged in, I think you mentioned that you logged in when this platform was launched in 2020. What do you think was the good surprise, and maybe one not so good surprise, that you stumbled upon when you logged into GA4 and you were setting it up the first time?
Yeah, so I highly encourage everyone to use the demo account. So there is actually a GA4 demo account, which is just filled with Google's data, random stuff that they put in there. So when I logged into that the first time, right, and I actually had something that had data in it, the thing that I was most excited about, there were two things. One was predictive analytics. I think that's super cool. So if you get enough events that come through to your website, which not a lot of people do, so that's a little bit of a bummer, but because there's a really big threshold, like you have to have 1,000 people that do fit in and don't fit in over like the last 28 days or the last 7 days. So it's a really high threshold. But with predictive analytics, it's exciting because we're seeing Google like kind of flex those machine learning muscles, right, in a way that's free to us. I mean, you don't pay anything for Google Analytics 4, but now all of a sudden you have access to a machine that can tell you, hey, it's kind of likely that these people are going to purchase in the next 28 days, or these are your top 28 days, or your top predicted 28-day spenders, or something like that. Like, that was really, really cool. And also the anomaly detection, which essentially just looks for statistical significance. And you'll see those in line charts throughout the platform, and you can create them as well in Explore. On the downside, the thing that took me back the most, honestly, was the naming conventions for events. So I had just started to dabble in, working with APIs and things of that nature. So I was a little bit used to seeing, all lowercase with underscores for events and dimensions and stuff. But prior to working with APIs, I was not used to seeing that at all. So when I got into the GA4's platform and I started seeing things named that way as events, I was really taken aback. Like, surely this can't be the final product that they're giving us. Like, this can't be the front end, but it actually is the front end. That kind of took me by surprise, in not a good way, because it feels scarier for some reason, because it feels like you're looking at a developer's work when we want to be just looking at a marketing tool, right? So yeah.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I remember that feeling too when I logged in the first time. I mean, I'm like, is this the beta? Like, where are all
Yeah.
my options? Where did all the pages go? Yeah, that was my same feeling. And
Yeah.
I mean, talking about the beta or the developer version, what other additions or new features do you see Google rolling out? Based on your experience with the platform and just basically product gaps or anything that you notice.
Yeah, so I think we're going to continue to see reports come through. Like, that's been people's number one. Like, when I started using the platform in 2020, there was no landing page report. None. And there wasn't even a way to create it. And then a few months later, there was a way to create it, but it wasn't there, not, natively. Now it is there natively. Like, if you go create one today, don't worry, you're going to have a landing page report. So I think we're going to continue to see rollouts of those. They just added funnel reports or like user journey reports via a funnel like a couple months ago, like a month or two ago. So I think we're going to continue to see some of those, right? Some of these pre-built reports that most people are using. And my hope is that we get to a point where the navigation in the report section of GA4 is going to be more user friendly. So I think we're going to see mostly user interface updates as time goes on, especially in these next 18 months. I think that's what they're going to have to focus on. Otherwise, they're going to continue to get tons and tons of complaints.
I'm glad you mentioned location pages or landing pages as well. A lot of our audience are multi-location brands, and obviously many of them have locator software, right? And with that brings some complexity with subdomains or different types of setups there. In terms of tracking performance with GA4, are there any major changes in that area that maybe our listeners need to know about?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing, I know a lot of folks that are in local or have franchises, right? They had views in Universal Analytics. So like, we just want to view how things do in Illinois, or we just want to see how things do in Wichita, Kansas, or wherever. And they were able to create those views. You don't have views in GA4. So what I encourage people to do is create audiences, because I mean, you can essentially create the same sort of filters that you were using for views in audiences. And then what you can do from there is create custom reports that only bring in those specific audiences. And once you create the report once, like, you can access it whenever. So that's one way of going about it. The other side of that, though, with subdomains and things of that nature, luckily, GA4, as long as you put the same measurement tag on your subdomains, GA4 kind of is able to say, oh, all right, so this is the same website. We're just going to funnel it all into one place. But again, the same place that you were able to filter out your IP address. So if you go into admin, property, under that property column, you go into data streams and then configure tag settings, and then see all, you're able to configure those cross-domain traffic. And so that's just where you say, hey, anytime somebody goes to one of these domains, it's still our domain. Don't count it as something different. It's just a subdomain, right? Like, you can do that right there in the platform as well. So cross-domain tracking is actually a lot easier in GA4 as well.
Gotcha. Now, when it comes to, I remember back in the day, right, we used to connect to Search Console, and you would get a little bit of keyword attribution of how people are, visiting the website and how they're landing on their pages. And I say a little bit because obviously Google doesn't really give us full data all the time. But how is that impacted on GA4? How is it being tracked? Any suggestions there? Any recommendations?
Yeah, once you connect Search Console, like, you get the same report that you got in Universal Analytics, right? I think the biggest thing that people have seen, I know I did this personally when working in local, is like UTM tracking for different Google My Business locations. So when GA4 first came out, there was a bug where UTMs, especially if you hard coded them, weren't showing up in GA4 anymore. Now they do. So it's the same, like, you go to session source medium or first user source medium. You can add a secondary dimension of campaign if you want. That's where we would put, like, the actual location is in the campaign section of that UTM. So you can do that there. On-site searches are also, this is really cool for SEOs. On-site searches are tracked out of the box with GA4. So once you set up GA4 and put the tag on your site, those site searches are tracked, and you'll be able to see those queries in Explore out of the box without any extra setup, which is nice.
Yeah, that definitely sounds nice. And I mean, I know that right after we're done with this episode, I have homework to do. And I know some of our listeners have homework as well. They're going to have to figure this one out. But also, I know that you help, SEO, location marketers, and just digital marketers as a whole with different trainings and different things, right? So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit more about your trainings and how you can help them further outside of this episode?
Yeah, so I have a GA4 course. I'm actually like redoing the entire thing. So it's going to be new and shiny. What's out there is still helpful, but I'm making a whole new one. So I have a course. I have, social media. I'm constantly putting tips and tricks out on social media. And then I do offer trainings for agencies or businesses that are really customized to like, what do you need to be able to do in the platform? And, here's how we can do it and the best way to get you all set up to ensure that you're getting the best data possible. Like you said, it's not always 100% perfect, and Google doesn't give us all the information. But we want to make sure that we're doing everything in our power to ensure that we're getting the best data possible.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Now, if you had to summarize this whole migration and just getting into GA4, what would be the one advice that you would give anybody going through this?
Be ready to be uncomfortable and get comfortable being messy. It's completely new. It's completely new for everyone, though. You're not alone in this, right? Like everybody's still figuring it out. So, take the time, even if it's just 10 minutes a day. You're like, all right, I'm going to deal with this for 10 minutes today. Ask yourself a question, go into GA4 and find it. And if you do that enough and you get comfortable knowing that it's going to take a second to figure out what you need to figure out, then you're going to be a lot more successful and you're going to be light years ahead of everybody else who's just avoiding it. So get comfortable being uncomfortable. Find a community that you can ask questions. There's like the Measure Slack that you can use. You can go on Twitter and ask people. There are tons of people out there talking about GA4 that are really receptive and really responsive to helping you in any way that they can. So just go in, know that it's going to be uncomfortable, but like I said, most all of the same data is available in GA4. It's just a matter of finding it and creating. It's kind of cool as somebody who's a little bit of a numbers nerd to feel like I am being creative by creating new reports and doing things like that. So it's messy, but it's worth it.
No, I appreciate your time and joining us on this episode, providing so much knowledge today. I really, really appreciate that.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
And with that, thank you so much, everybody, for listening. If you like this episode of the Local Marketing Beat, please give it a like, subscribe, and share it with your colleagues. This is a fun conversation that we have with experts on what's happening out there. You can also learn more about Uberall at uberall.com. And with that, I will see you guys next time.